Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Callie, and today I'm going to be doing my current list of 5-star reads for 2023. I have had a ton of 5-star reads, so I figured this would be a great time to go through them. I am excluding any rereads, so these are all just 5-star reads that I have read so far this year. So without further ado, the first one that I have is Sword from the Embers by Chloe C. Penaranda. This is the 5th book in the An Heir Comes to Rise series. I fell down such a rabbit hole at the beginning of the year with this series. Actually, I think I started it technically at the end of 2022. And this one came out in January, and I had just caught up the week before it finished, or that this dropped. And I was so glad I didn't have to wait for this to drop, because the cliffhangers in each of these books is ridiculous. Even in this one, the cliffhanger made me sob. And this is where so much comes together. It was so magical to see that all the strings being pulled just the right way, all the characters going to where they're needed. It was phenomenally woven to get to this point. Now, this is not the finale like I thought it was. I believe there's going to be at least 1 or 2 more books in this series. Book 6 drops, I believe, in December or January of either this December or January of 24. But I am so invested in this series. Faith's story and all the other characters just hold a very special place in my heart. This gives such Throne of Glass vibes, but still being wholly its own story, and I just love how everything has come together. Up next, I have Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. I put off reading this because I heard very mixed things about this book, but I read House of the House on the Cerulean Sea a year or so ago, and I loved it. So I was like, okay, I love the first book in this kind of world where magic meets modern society. I need to give this a shot. So this follows a man who has died and is in this, like, quite literally a halfway purgatory house, and has to finish he's with this like brand new reaper, and he has to figure out what his unfinished business is. And it is so sweet and so wholesome. This is very cozy-ish, but very emotional fantasy. And the writing style sucks you in immediately, and the story is very poignant and just so heartfelt and wholesome. And I loved this world. I can see where people would feel a little hesitant about this book. It was very similar to House of the Cerulean Sea, but I still felt like this was very unique and very fresh, and I adored it. Up next, I have A Not So Meet Cute by Meghan Quinn. I fell down a bit of a Meghan Quinn rabbit hole. Right before this, I read Royally Not Ready, and then I heard that the Kane Brothers series was phenomenal, and for people who love Lauren Asher, and I adore Lauren Asher. So I started this series, and they weren't kidding. These are so much fun and just so cute. It's just, they give you a toothache. They're just so sweet and adorable, but they also have really, it's gonna sound so stupid, really real characters that you can connect with. While Lottie is obnoxious and Huxley is just like a very stereotypical grumpy male main character, they are so sweet, and they end up having a ton of depth to them. And I just adored this. I actually just got my illustrated edition in the mail today. So I'm really, really happy that I finally have a physical copy of this. I'm gonna go back into my Kindle and tab it, because I tabbed the crap out of all of these books. But this is just, I love Lottie and Huxley. I will talk about this later, but they were not my favorite couple, but it's still a 5-star read for me. Next I have Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan. I love Kennedy Ryan. However, I'm very hesitant to read more Kennedy Ryan because her books make me sob. Now, I love a very good emotional story, and this did not disappoint. This is a second chance marriage in trouble romance where there is so much trauma being dealt with, a lot of communication issues being dealt with, And this was mainly about the characters coming to terms with their trauma and healing, but being a healing person for each other. It was a beautiful love story. You got to see bits and pieces of their original love story, as well as when they fall back in love after all the events after their divorce. I really enjoyed how this all came together. I was really nervous. I'd never read a second chance with a divorce. I've read second chance with like breakups of like girlfriend, boyfriend kind of a thing, but not breaking up of a marriage. And it was really fascinating because Kennedy Ryan's not afraid to shy away from those hard-hitting aspects, and that she did not let up with this one at all. So Kennedy Ryan, I think everything I've read by her has been a 5-star read. They are just very emotional and leave you feeling very raw after you finish them, but in a good way. Now, I mentioned that Huxley and Lottie were not my favorite. That is because Huxley's brother, Breaker, and Leah's story is so cute. I love friends to lovers, and that's what this is. This is Breaker and Leah have been best friends since college. They live right next to each other. They have their best friend-isms. They have their traditions, but they've never explored anything romantic. And when Breaker starts to see how Leah's brand new fiance and soon to be mother-in-law treats her, he finally starts to realize he has feelings for her, and he is throwing his hat into the race for Leah's affections. And I adored how that went with this. He wasn't just that guy who will just curb stomp anybody who hurts Leah, which he would do, but he lets Leah fight her own battles and her personal cheerleader, which I wholeheartedly adored every second. I devoured the crap out of this book, and this solidified Meghan Quinn. I mean, a good amount of these books have solidified Meghan Quinn as an auto-by-author for me at this point, but this one, it was emotional, it was beautiful, it was a fantastic love story, and I was just rooting for Breaker and Leah the entire time. I do have a lot of romance books on this list, and I will not apologize for that. This is probably my favorite romance book of all time now, and that is Archer's Voice by Mia Sheridan. I had seen this going around a ton on TikTok. I saw a couple of scenes and they all sounded really sweet and really fun, so I wanted to give this a whirl. I did not expect to be in my basement reading this book while it was storming outside, to be sobbing my eyes out to the point of where I could not see the words on the page anymore. But here we are. Archer's Voice is a phenomenal story about a young man named Archer who is mute. He ended up getting shot when he was a young child, and it damaged his vocal cords. And Bree comes into town looking to escape, and she speaks sign language and becomes fascinated by Archer and actually starts to treat him like a human being. And their love story is so beautiful. It is not necessarily about, well, yes, it is about them falling in love. It is about Archer and Bree finding themselves and finding it within themselves to love themselves, which is a very complicated sentence, but it is a beautiful, poignant story, and the love story is one of the best I have ever read. I told you I have a ton of romance on here. I have Final Offer by Lauren Asher. This is one of the series that got me super into romance again, and that is the Dreamland Billionaires. This series, our companion novels, follows 3 brothers who are essentially like the grandchildren of Walt Disney, and their grandfather has died, but in order to get their inheritance, they have to do something. And Cal's story is very difficult because this is the final one. We've kind of seen Cal, and he's been built up in our heads. He is the brother with an addiction, and you see him go through it within this book. It is why it is the biggest of all of them. And this one's also a friends to lovers, second chance romance kind of a thing. They were originally friends to lovers. They tried dating. His addiction got in the way of their relationship. So now is the second chance for him and Alana. And very similar to Kennedy Ryan, Lauren Asher is not afraid to go hard into these hard-hitting topics such as addiction. She definitely portrayed addiction in a very realistic manner, to the point of where you're trying to root for Callahan, but you can't because he's just damaging himself more, damaging Alana, and it is very hard to read, but the payoff for this story was phenomenal. And Cal's story was he's my second favorite Kane brother, but he definitely comes into a close second. Only because Rowan Kane has a very special place in my heart. That was a 5-star read from last year. But Cal is there's something special about him, that his story is very more raw and real, and it was very hard to put this down. Up next, I have a contemporary fiction book that I had on my list for a long time. That's The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas. I had been meaning to read this book for ages. When I got back into reading, this was brand new, but I was sticking mainly to fantasy. I wasn't really touching contemporary very often. I wish I did read this at the time. This is a very important novel to read. It deals with police brutality, racism, systemic racism, and so many other very important topics that we need to be talking about and discussing very openly within our society today. And this book handled all of those aspects extremely well. And it was, while being delicate, was dealing out very harsh truths that people really need to come to terms with. It was very eye-opening to read this book. Next I have Travis, also by Mia Sheridan. Mia Sheridan is another author who has been constant 5 stars. It's actually a spin-off of Archer's Voice. This happens 5 years after the events of Archer's Voice. This follows Archer's very shitty cousin, and you actually get his story, and he's very much not necessarily, he's an antagonist definitely in Archer's Voice. So I went into this very hesitant and a little nervous. I wasn't sure if I wanted to like Travis, but this had so much growth in it, and Travis's story was fantastic. He deals with a lot of harsh truths in his life, as well as coming to terms with the fact of how he has perpetuated that cycle of abuse with Archer and how he doesn't want that for himself and his potential future family. This love story was phenomenal. Haven was a great love interest for Travis. She really balanced him, and that showed constantly on the page. Up next I have This Woven Kingdom by Tahira Mafi. This is a more recent read. Weirdly enough, I go through bouts of having a ton of 5-star reads and then having none for a few months. So this is a Middle Eastern inspired story by Tahira Mafi that I devoured. This has jinn magic. It also has very political aspects of this world. Really secretive magical creatures, and a very badass female protagonist. What I love about Tahira Mafi's writing style, because I adored the Shatter Me series, I have also liked her contemporary books, but what I love about her writing is she almost just drops you into her world and says go. And I really thrive in books that do that, just because I can then warp the world in my head and not come to terms with it, but understand and just delve into the story so much easier. And I really love that. It is like watching a movie with her books. They are very descriptive. Her characters come to life off the page. And I love that about the Shatter Me series, and this one is no different. Very similar writing style. Obviously it's the same author, but just sucks you in and keeps you engaged so much. And I care so much about these characters, their growth, their journeys, and even like their motivations. All of it is so fascinating to read. I don't want to put it down. I don't want their stories to end. And that to me is a fantastic book. Up next is another Lauren Asher book, and that is Redeemed by Lauren Asher. This is her 4th book in the Dirty Air series, which came before the Dreamland Billionaires, so I was trying to get through her backlog a bit, and I ran through it very quickly. But this follows Sal's story, and I love his story because you are following him after losing his leg. Like I said, Lauren Asher is not afraid to go into these dark and scary topics that people don't want to think about. They don't necessarily reach out to read about. So having him be an amputee and then having this very chaotic American come and pull him out of this funk, get him back into racing. This story was beautiful. A story about healing, coming to terms with the randomness of life, and then just healing, like mentally, physically. All of it was just a beautiful journey, and I adored everything about this love story. Up next, I have Fourth Wing. I jumped on the hype train and have not gotten off. I devoured this. I have not become, okay, and this is gonna be, because I have the book that I read almost not immediately after, but I read this at the end of May, and then one of the first books I read in June, I got very similar, not similar vibes, but like, I haven't felt this connected to a book in so long. I haven't felt this kind of deep rooted obsession since I think Crescent City 1. And I can't stop thinking about Violet and Xaden. The dragons are fantastic. The world is fantastic. I know people keep comparing it to Divergent, but God, I hate that because I didn't care for Divergent. But it does have those kinds of vibes, but make it good and so much better. Everything about this was phenomenal. I need Iron Flame so badly. I am a little ashamed of the things I would do to get my hands on that book. And the fact that this is going to be a 6-book series is phenomenal, terrifying, and I'm just giddy that for the next 4 or 5 years I will have Fourth Wing content. And it's just, I cannot sing this book's praises enough. It is a phenomenal story. Violet is one of my favorite female protagonists. Xaden is over here just like killing people left and right, but doing it for Violet, or letting Violet kill people left and right and just being like, you go, sweetie, you do you. Kill those assholes. It's fantastic. And then in this fantasy dragon school setting, everything about this is phenomenal, and I have no critiques. None. So like I said, I haven't had that feeling of a phenomenal book, and then I read Fourth Wing, and then one of the other books that I read very quickly after Fourth Wing, I got that again, and that is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This is very early 1900s vibes, but make it a war between gods in a fantasy setting with a magical typewriter. I also got a lot of Dramoni vibes from this, and Dramoni is, which I realize I say that all the time and I don't explain what it is. It is a Draco Hermione ship that is huge in fan fiction. It is one of the first fan fictions I ever read, and I fell in love with it and have been a fan of that ship ever since. So, get a lot of that kind of vibes from this book, and the love story was phenomenal. The fantasy setting was very simplistic, but it was unique. And then the plot itself was so dynamic. I could not put this book down. It was so heartfelt and gut-wrenching. It felt like a love story told about 2 star-crossed lovers from World War I, and then throw magic into it. It was so good. I am obsessed. I'm really glad that this is only 2 books, and book 2 actually just got announced that they pushed up so this was originally, book 2 was supposed to come out in April of next year. It is now coming out in December. And I've never been more excited. So my fall is going to be great because I'm going to have Iron Flame, and I'm going to have, I think it's Ruthless Rivals is book 2. It's Ruthless something. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, but I adore this book so much. It is by far a new favorite. Up next, I have Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. I was in a huge letter writing thing in the month of June, and this was no different. This is such a sweet, poignant love story. Again, I definitely gravitate towards the very emotional and poignant love stories, and Abby Jimenez is really good at doing that. We have our male main character who has very severe social anxiety, and our main female character who is who just got through a very messy divorce and is struggling with a lot of things within her personal life, including medical issues within her immediate family and issues of abandonment. And it's such a beautiful story on how they learn to communicate with each other. They figure out the tells for each other, and you just see that love language evolve and grow throughout the entire book. There's a lot of romance books on this Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood. This is her newest book. Again, Dramoni vibes. But this, again, very similar to yours truly. I loved this because you see them see each other for who they really are and communicate and develop these communication skills that work best for each other. And it is so beautiful to watch that love story bloom between the two. Jack and Elsie are so amazing. And then there's also the feminist streak of women in STEM. As a female who has a degree in a science, it felt just very powerful to be able to read about that and see Elsie's perspective on all of it. I also loved the argument between theoretical and